Have you ever stopped to think that even the strongest man in the world could have a weak spot? Worse yet, what if that weakness isn't a sword, a trap, or an army, but just a look, a fake caress, a sweet word whispered at just the right or wrong moment? The story of Samson and Delilah isn't just about physical strength. It's about the kind of battle we face every single day, right here inside our own soul. The battle between desire and purpose, between momentary pleasure and God's promise. For a long time, Delilah has been portrayed as the great villain woman who betrayed Israel's liberator, handing over his secret to his enemies. But was it really just about greed? Or was there something darker behind that betrayal? Fear? Pressure? Blackmail? What truly drives someone to turn their back on the one who trusts them? And the most important question, aren't we also caught in similar traps without even realizing it? This story might have a lot more to do with your life than you think. Because deep down, we all have a hair to hit a sensitive spot where the enemy keeps trying to touch. And here's the question that won't go away. Are you truly protecting yours? Stay with me, because over the next few minutes, we're going to dive deep into one of the Bible's most intriguing and lesson-filled episodes. And I promise, by the end of this journey, you'll be looking at your own relationships through a very different lens. The story of Samson begins even before his first cry. His mother, a barren woman, received a visit from an angel who brought a message that would change everything. The son she would bear was to be a Nazarite Simeon, set apart, consecrated to God from the womb. He was forbidden to cut his hair, drink wine, or touch anything unclean. Every single detail of that consecration pointed to a much bigger purpose: to be a vessel of deliverance against the oppression of the Philistines. It wasn't just about being born. It was about being born with a mission written in heaven. Now, think about this for a second. How many times do we forget that we, too, carry a promise? Maybe not one as dramatic as defeating 1,000 men, but still just as important in God's eyes. The story of Samson reminds us that there is a divine plan at work, even when we don't fully understand the role we're meant to play. From the very beginning, God already knew what he would accomplish through him, just like he knows what he wants to do through you. The problem is that so often we grow up without ever hearing these truths. It was a daily commitment to living covenant with God. Every strand of Samson's hair served as a constant reminder. You were called for something greater. And honestly, don't we all need reminders like that? Maybe it's a phrase on your mirror, a morning prayer, or that one Bible verse that lifts you up on the worst days. Without these anchors, it's easy to forget where we're headed. But even with all that consecration, Samson wasn't some kind of superhero immune to life's temptations. What makes his story so powerful isn't just the strength itself, but the tension between divine purpose and human weakness, between the calling and the distractions along the way. And that's exactly where things start to go wrong. But we'll unpack that in the next part. He was a true weapon of war in God's hands. A warrior unlike anything the Philistines had ever faced. He didn't need to be covered in armor or surrounded by armies. The divine strength within him was so great that, at one point, he defeated 1,000 soldiers using nothing but the jawbone of a donkey. Yes, you heard that right, a donkey's jawbone. No sword, no shield, just whatever he could find on the ground. And he won. This shows us something powerful. When God chooses to use someone, the tool can be the most unlikely thing imaginable. How often do we tell ourselves we're not ready? That we don't have the right weapons to fulfill our calling? How many times do we postpone what we were meant to do, claiming we lack the resources, the preparation, the perfect timing? Samson's story proves that when God's plan is in motion, what's already in your hands is enough. And whatever is missing, he will provide. Samson's name wasn't whispered among his enemies, it was feared. And there's a powerful lesson in that. When you start walking in your true purpose, don't be surprised if you start to make some people uncomfortable. There will always be someone who wants to snuff out the light you carry. And don't be fooled, sometimes those attacks don't come from the outside. They come from within, from self-sabotaging thoughts, doubts, insecurities. Even as this nearly invincible warrior, Samson was still human flesh and blood with desires, emotions, and above all, a deep emotional vulnerability that would become the weakest link in his armor. And right there between the glory of his victories and the loneliness of his soul, the next chapter of this story begins to take shape. After so many victories, so many enemies defeated, you think Samson would be surrounded by allies, friends, people who had his back, right? But no, the hero of Israel, the strongest man alive, was, in reality, a lonely man. And if you've ever felt the weight of loneliness, you know this. It doesn't matter how strong you look on the outside when your heart is empty. Even the softest words can sound like music. It was in this vulnerable space that Delilah entered the scene. With a charming smile, eyes full of secrets, and intentions Samson had no way of seeing at first. Delilah didn't come with a sword or threats. She came with presence, with time, with the kind of attention Samson might never have truly received before. And hey, race is something worth reflecting on. Sometimes we don't realize we're being manipulated because we mistake interest for care, obsession for love. It's easy to be deceived when loneliness screams louder than reason. And in that game, Delilah was a master. She knew exactly how to fill the emotional void Samson couldn't face on his own. The Bible doesn't reveal much about her background. Was she a Philistine? Was she hired for the mission? Or was she acting out of personal ambition? The truth is, no matter what her motives were, Delilah had a clear strategy. Earn Samson's trust and hold the key to his heart. And she did it masterfully, not in a rush, but with patience. She knew that a liberator like Samson wouldn't fall all at once. She needed to win him over slowly, soften his defenses, get him to let his guard down. And this part of the story delivers a serious wake-up call for all of us. The greatest dangers don't always come disguised as enemies. More often than not, they arrive smiling, offering exactly what we crave the most. That's when you realize Samson's toughest battle wasn't against 1,000 armed men. It was against his own need to feel loved. And in that fragile space, the threads of betrayal began to weave together. She knew that destroying someone from the inside takes time and subtlety. She started with innocent questions wrapped in curiosity. Tell me, Samson, where does your strength come from? What could possibly make you vulnerable? And like a man walking a dangerous tightrope, Samson dodged the questions, making up false answers, testing the waters. But hey, race the thing, when you love or think you love, it's easy to let your guard down. And that's exactly when Delilah tightened the ropes of emotional manipulation. Each time Samson refused to tell her the truth, Delilah responded with emotional blackmail. She cried, accused him of not trusting her, of not loving her. It was the classic script one you might have seen play out in real life, maybe even in your own life. The strategy was simple. There was no need to fight him physically. All she had to do was use the right words, ask the right questions at just the right moment. And little by little, day after day, she wore down Samson's resistance. Even though Samson was unbeatable on the battlefield, he didn't know how to fight this war. Because when the battlefield is the heart, the weapons are completely different. How many times have we found ourselves caught in this same kind of struggle? Giving into pressure just to keep someone close. Saying yes when we should say no, simply to avoid conflict or loneliness. Even knowing deep down that the cost could be devastating. This is where emotional weakness becomes a wide open door. And the enemy always knows exactly where to push. In the end, Samson gave in. He revealed his most precious secret, the symbol of his covenant with God. He told Delilah about the Nazirite vow, the hair that had never been cut, the consecration that connected him to divine strength. And in that vulnerable moment of confession thinking, he was proving his love for Delilah. He didn't even realize that he had just opened the door to his own downfall. The most heartbreaking part? He was the one who unlocked that door himself. The strongest man in Israel, the great liberator, sleeping peacefully in the lap of the one who was about to betray him. While Samson rested, fully trusting Delilah, she quietly called the Philistines. With her own hands, she cut his hair, the visible sign of his promise, his consecration, his covenant with God. And do you know what hurts the most about this story? It wasn't a sword that brought him down. It wasn't a brutal attack. It was scissors. silent, careful, while he dreamed. When Samson woke up, he thought he could shake off his enemies as he had done so many times before. But something was different. The divine strength was gone. The heritage symbol of his consecration was lying on the ground. And the Philistines, who had once trembled at the mere mention of his name, captured him easily. The man who could see so clearly on the battlefield was now blind. But the truth is, he had been blind on the inside for a long time. They dragged Samson to Gaza. They chained him. They blinded him, forced him into slavery, grinding grain at the mill like an ox, completely humiliated. The great deliverer of Israel, now reduced to a laughingstock. And honestly, how many times have we ended up in similar places? Trapped in cycles of pain and regret because we trusted the wrong people, or because we ignored the warnings God placed right in front of us. Sometimes we don't even realize the cut has already been made, that the strength we once had is gone. Losing everything doesn't mean it's over, because God never wastes a life that was once consecrated to Him, not even when we fail miserably. Sometimes hitting rock bottom is exactly where the comeback begins. In Samson's case, his fall wasn't the end of the story. It was just the silence before the most honest prayer he would ever pray. The same silence that gets drowned out when the crowd is cheering your victories. It's funny how sometimes we only really start to see clearly when we lose sight of what is temporary. Without the applause, without the strength, without the pride, that's when Samson began to understand that his power had never been in his muscles or his hair, but in the covenant with the God who had chosen him. And right there, in the depths of his pain, the process of true repentance began. Not the shallow kind of regret that says, well, a messed up life goes on, but a complete surrender. The surrender of someone who finally realized how far they had drifted from the source of their strength. And here comes one of the hardest hitting lessons of this story. It's not about never failing, because we all fail. It's about what we do after the fall. The Bible tells us that Samson's hair began to grow back. What a beautiful detail, isn't it? As if God Himself was saying, I'm not done with you yet. Even as a prisoner, even blind, the divine plan was still standing. Because that's who God is. He doesn't throw away those He has chosen. He restores. He brings back. But only after we acknowledge that, without Him, we are nothing but dust. He didn't pray for revenge just for the sake of revenge. He prayed for strength. He prayed for another chance. Not to show off, not to feed his ego, but to fulfill the purpose for which he had been called since his mother's womb. It's easy to pray when you're on top, when everything is going well. But it's in the pit at rock bottom that the prayers come straight from the heart. And there, chained and in tears, Samson reconnected with God's promise, not as a hero, but as a broken, humbled servant. How many times, Jorge, do we only learn the true value of consecration after everything falls apart? How often does God need to allow us to lose what we thought was our source of strength just to turn our eyes back to Him? The story of Samson teaches us that true repentance is the first giant step toward redemption, and that God's plan was never about brute strength. It was always about a surrendered heart. The answer to Samson's prayer comes in the next chapter. The temple of Dagon was packed full of people laughing, drinking, mocking, and right there, in the middle of all the celebration, stood Samson. No longer the fearsome warrior now, reduced to a trophy. The ultimate symbol of the mighty one who had fallen. Israel's liberator had become a circus act, the punchline of their jokes. But what no one knew, what maybe even Samson himself hadn't fully realized, was that God still had one final chapter left to write. Because God's plans aren't erased by our failures. He keeps writing even on the torn out pages of our story. And there, between those columns, he prayed one last time. He didn't ask for fame. He didn't ask for his strength back just to prove a point. He asked for one last chance, not to shine for himself, but to fulfill the calling God had placed on his life from the very beginning. With his hands on the pillars and his heart fully surrendered, Samson finally understood. The strength had never been his. It had always belonged to God. And right there, in the middle of humiliation, came true consecration. Not the consecration of his hair, but of his heart. And the temple collapsed. Philistine rulers, nobles, soldiers common people, all crushed beneath the ruins of their own arrogance. And Samson, in his final act, gave his life to fulfill the mission he was born to accomplish. Does it sound tragic? Maybe, but it's also deeply redemptive. Because even in his final sacrifice, Samson wasn't just a man who had been destroyed. He was a vessel that God used until his very last breath. How many times have we run away from our purpose out of fear, pride, or distraction? And how many times has God, in his mercy, given us another chance to return, to realign, to step back into his plan? Yes, Samson died that day, but he died reconciled with his calling. He died not as a defeated man, but as someone who finally understood that true strength doesn't come from what we can do, but from who we were called to be. It is a mirror, a warning, an invitation. How many times have you trusted the wrong people, or opened your heart where you should have built a wall? Maybe, like Samson, you've handed over precious secrets, shared vulnerabilities that should have been kept between you and God and not exposed to the enemy. But the most beautiful part of this story is that even after the fall, there was still room for redemption. And that leads me to ask you, what about you? Is there an area of your life where you feel like your hair has been cut? A purpose you've abandoned along the way? Maybe you've set aside God's plan because of disappointment, betrayal, or broken promises. If that's the case, Samson's story is here to remind you. It's never too late to pray, never too late to return, never too late to ask for a second chance. Are you truly protecting what he has given you? Or have you, without realizing it, let the enemy get too close? I invite you to reflect on this, to take an honest look at your alliances, your choices, your relationships. Because sometimes our real strength isn't in what others see. It's in what we decide to fully consecrate to the Lord. If this message spoke to your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Here, we're always bringing stories, reflections, and teachings that can not only change the way you think, but transform your spiritual journey. Stay with me, because there's so much more content on the way. And I want to see you standing firm, strong, and fully aware of the purpose you were created for.